happy to be moderating this particular discussion with two really eminent scholars. They have been working and doing a deep dive in our subject today. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker. She is an Associate Vice President of Equity and Inclusion in North Hennepin Community College and a Certified Diversity Trainer titled the Inclusive Community Architect. She is also a diversity strategist, allyship coach, author, and educator. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rassheedah Watts. Thank you, Dr. Watts. We are also going to be joined in that conversation by Dr. Krisha Kops, who was born in 1986 into a German-Indian family. He's an author, journalist, and philosopher with a proclivity for intercultural and global justice-related topics. He studied philosophy and journalism in London before receiving his doctorate with a thesis on intercultural philosophy. This is definitely a very worthy addition to our conversation today. Please join us, Dr. Krisha Kops. So I've been told we'll spend about 45 minutes unpacking some of the common themes, and then we'll open the floor for questions. It would be great if you have questions rather than statements, but we'll get to that part in a bit. Thank you very much. Can we do a bit of a sound check? I'd request you guys to switch on your mics and see.
Hello.
Yeah. हम अपने mics on रख सकते हैं? Yes. Thank you so much. So Dr. Watts, if I may begin with you, we've always found courage to be a cornerstone for all leadership. But how do you differentiate, and what's so unique about courageous leadership and its need in the present day and age?
I think it's a very important question that you ask. Doing this work as a diversity officer on the executive level, leading colleges and different institutions where I've served, I've worked closely with presidents, with boards that run the university. And unfortunately, the large marker, the indicator that I've found for ineffective work in diversity and inclusion is the lack of courage amongst these leaders to do what they need to do, to make the right choices, to be effective. So I think when it comes to courageous leadership, it comes at a cost. It's going to cost us all something. Whatever that is. In these situations that I'm speaking about, the fear has been around losing donors, losing funding for the institution. So I think once our leaders start understanding that they have to have a stronger moral compass to be committed to human justice, then hopefully they will be more apt to making the right choices courageously.
What we see around us, in order to rally people in one corner, there has been a lot of fear factors, there has been a lot of fear mongering and hate mongering. That leaves very little space for diversity inclusion, because once you will have diverse groups being represented and being a part of the decision-making process, then it would be difficult to actually escalate those fears and move people into desired action. How do the two go together?
Well, I think it's important, first of all, I really believe in coalition building, right? So what that means is having a unified voice, a unified body that works together. Typically when you do this work alone, it's easy to be a target, and trust me, I know. There have been plenty of times with myself doing this work, standing up for different marginalized identities. It's not the norm, it's not common, it's not something that's always celebrated. So that can come at a cost. It's not unusual for me to be in a position where I think to myself, is this going to cost me my job? Because it does happen. Many times, even if you're in a diversity role, if you stand up for the right thing, you can lose your job. So I think when you work in a coalition, you work with a team of people. For us, we have diversity committees, we have coalitions with other organizations. You will have a stronger voice. And when you are a stronger body of people, it makes it harder for an organization or a leadership, let's say, to target you. And that's also part of strategic leadership, because when you work together, then not only are you able to move the needle forward with diversity and inclusion by yourself, but you're doing it with a team of people, and you're able to say, this is not my singular thought or singular purpose, but this is really the purpose of the organization or this body as a whole.
I think that's a very key point. Krisha, I think it ties in beautifully. The subjects of diversity and inclusion tie in beautifully to the sense of identity a person has. I would like to go back to one of those ancient Roman sayings where they believe that no great nation can ever be cosmopolitan. But fast forward now in 2023, we believe the more multicultural we are, and we're looking at multicultural national identities, especially for the developed world, that are opening their doors to let people in who are talented, who are professional, and who may be, you know, escaping areas of conflict and, you know, debilitating circumstances. How do you see these new multicultural identities and diversities shaping the global world?
I think there are people who are utterly enthusiastic, and they think, you know, we have multiple of identities, and that's the solution, because if everyone, you know, becomes, multiple, it's, we will solve every problem. I think the solution is in between, because what we see is exactly as you described it. It becomes more diversified, but at the same time you have a counter movement which is basically arguing against the problems that this diversity causes, right? Because the plurality of identity makes you question who you are at the same time. It can be overburdening. So the question is, how do you bring this together? Instead of being just, fundamentalist with one identity and then having the post-structural, post-modern idea of just dissolving yourself in, a gazillion million different identities. I guess in intercultural philosophy, we try to find something in between. We try not to be universalists and not particularists, which means, neither is there just the one identity, but at least you have to know who you are. So, we're trying to find a solution in between. And maybe that's also the answer to many questions, Instead of, like you can see it in the West, you have a lot of different identities, and you can be this and that, and it causes problems as well. And then you have on the other side just this fundamental idea of having, just this one religion or just this one political system, and that causes problems as well. So the question is, where's the answer in between?
But how do you find those answers, and how do you resolve conflicts? Sometimes when you have a pluralistic society or multicultural ethnicities and identities, they may be at loggerheads. Sometimes one feels threatened by the other. So what will be the hallmark of leadership? How do you resolve those differences?
Probably there's not one solution, but the one solution that I'm always, that I favor is the solution of contact, which we call in sociology contact hypothesis, which means, if you leave people secluded and they don't get in touch, they don't get into contact, they can't get rid of their prejudices, they can't, evolve a relationship of empathy and understanding towards the other person.
Yeah.
So the most important thing, I think, is, or one of the most paramount important things, is to give space for the people to get in touch with each other, which is not that easy in times where we, spend more time online, where we have less spaces to come together, Like in Germany, I always use this example, just a supermarket. In a supermarket, you meet a person, and probably you don't know where he comes from, what gender, what class background. And nowadays we have these machines where we can pay automatically. So the human aspect is gone. So one more contact gone in the open space that we have in Germany. And this is something we have to look into, finding spaces that people get together and from there progress.
I think you're absolutely spot on. The human connection takes away a lot of biases. You might at times feel threatened, or you might be feeling fearful of a culture, but it's partly embedded in ignorance. When you don't know other people too well, you perhaps have inherited a lot of bias, or you've constructed your opinion based on hearsay. But how does the notion of cultural appropriation come into this, Dr. Watts? I'd be very interested in your views, because sometimes we assume that we are giving people a space on our table, but we haven't let go of our biases, and we are including them through a certain lens. We are giving them a particular role, and we are still putting them in a box.
Absolutely. Well, the part, and I love what you said about, I call it awareness building, and I believe it applies very directly on what you're speaking of. So biases are human nature. We all are going to have a preconceived notion. By me sitting up here, you probably, the most important part is to start dismantling those biases by awareness building or contact, as you mentioned, Krishna. I believe part of that solution, along with awareness building, is making sure that we create inclusive environments. That is part of the work that I do. That is an important part of diversity, because you can have all of these different demographic populations, as you mentioned, these different identity groups, but unless you are creating an environment where everyone feels valued, seen, and heard, then it's for naught. So when we're talking about bringing everyone to the table, we have to consider how are we making sure that the people at the table have a voice. And one thing that we like to say in the United States is not just having a seat at the table, but asking me to join you in conversation. That is the question that anyone here that's interested in diversity and inclusion should consider. How am I making sure that I'm bringing folks in and inviting them to be a part of the group?
And okay, and let's shift the table around a little bit. Krisha, how do you get a person who's just recently been invited to a table, is now feeling included, but how do we make sure, or how do we facilitate that they speak in an authentic voice? Do we extend kindness, empathy, but even that comes within its own notion of patronizing a person, perhaps?
I mean, the first thing is, I don't know, I'm a bit skeptical about the idea of authenticity, because I still believe that we have certain roles that we play in certain environments. Obviously, there's some roles which are closer to our real identity, our real self, whatever that may be. So let's say there is something close to, well, let's say there is a self which is more authentic than the other. I guess, speaking from a philosopher's point of view, it's very important to what we call in philosophy to create a space of dialogue. But dialogue is not only just, you know, letting someone talk, but it is an exercise where I really truly open myself up towards the other, and the other has the space to talk. And I also learn how to listen. I think that's one important thing that we actually forgot, or we don't know to listen anymore, you know? Because most people, if you see a discussion here, you know, I will probably think something, and then Rassheedah saying, and I have a counter argument, and then I want to, this is not listening. Listening is an exercise, almost a spiritual exercise, where you open yourself up and really first empty yourself to receive what the other person is saying. And that's not easy. Most people don't know how to listen anymore. So to create an environment of real dialogue, to give the person the chance to express him or herself. And this is, by really, it's not easy. I think this is one of the most important things that we can do. For example, one example from an indigenous community, the Inuit have a circle. And in that circle, you get something like a microphone or a symbolic microphone. And this person has as much time to speak as long as she or he wants, and to say whatever he wants for as long as he wants. And then it goes around. What do you think happens if the 10th person speaks? She had to listen to everything that was said before. The chances of thinking about your own prepositions is much higher than when you just try to counterattack the other person. So we can learn also from other cultures what it means to open up to other people.
And how have we been able to do that across time in history and philosophy, Dr. Watts? If you were to look back, and of course your study is to deep dive into what we had as cultural practices, historical practices, we perhaps lost them along the way, and now in your work you'd probably want to take us back to some of those practices. How were we able to do that so smoothly back in time, and what did we unlearn along the way?
Absolutely. So I don't know that it'll be a smooth transition back. This is why we continue to do this work. But it's interesting that you bring up the indigenous communities, because where I work specifically in Minnesota, really all throughout the United States, we have an indigenous population. That is our history, the Native Americans. But in Minnesota, very specifically, what we've been doing there at North Hennepin Community College is integrating what we call racial healing circles. And we meant earlier to have a community healing circle.
That's what I really like, the diversity which is reflected in the admiration for poetry or writing.
What you have in 2 days is a microcosm of Pakistan's performing arts, thought leaders, of course people from the television industry, from the literary circles. So you get a glimpse of it all. Rassheedah, again, the same question for you. Did you imagine Karachi and people of Karachi to be the way you're witnessing them and experiencing them to be?
I love Pakistan and I love Karachi, really. And I'm not just saying that. I don't know what I thought. I mean, I got the phone call, right, to go to Pakistan. And I've always been more globally oriented because my mother is born in Central America. So when I got the call, I didn't hesitate. I said, Pakistan? Yes, yes, of course. And I will say this, it's been better than I would have imagined because of the people. So the work that I do is very relationship-based, right? It's very much about connecting with people. And everyone that I have met, I went to, I'm gonna get the name wrong, was it Zainab Market?
Zainab Market.
Yes, I went to Zainab Market, I went to Empress Market. So I've been around and everyone has been so kind, so wonderful. I went to the, where the founder of Pakistan is buried. So it's just been a wonderful opportunity. And believe it or not, I'm actually wondering how I can bring, when I can bring my family again to visit Karachi. So thank you.
Looking forward to
thank
that.
you again. Wonderful.
Krisha, whenever we speak about diversity and inclusion, of course, part of the conversation always goes towards gender inclusion and diversity. You know, finding more and more opportunities for women, opening doors for them, smashing the glass ceiling or the glass doors. What was your experience about the women in the country? I'm sure when you have now interacted with professionals, with people who are facilitating, many speakers and authors here at the festival, did it match up to what you had in a perception about Pakistani women?
Yes and no, because I have to be careful. I have only been here for 3 days, so my judgment is very, superficial in this case. I guess we're still in a certain bubble here, right? So there's a difference to the festival itself and being on the street. And also having a lot of experience with India, it's still a patriarchal society, right? But here, the diversity that I see at the festival is very admiring. I mean, I'm sitting with two very lovely women.
You're actually a minority on the panel.
Yeah. See? But still, then I go outside and it's very male-dominated. Yes. So there is a contrast. I mean, in every society, you have parts which are more progressive in that way, and other, they have different opinions about it. And you see, again, that Pakistan, in this case, has a diversity. And I can't speak for the numbers. I know there is a contrast in what I see here and what I see on the streets.
Right.
As a very mere observation without, having numbers in the background or anything like that.
Again, drawing from your work, Dr. Watts, do you feel that in an inclusive society that is embracing change and difference of opinion, is there room for patriarchal values? Or what is it seems to be a very charged subject here in Pakistan. What's your take on patriarchy, and how do will it transform in the years to come?
Thank you for giving me that question, because I did want to follow up. So I'm not going to speak within the realm specifically of Pakistan, but given my lens coming from the United States, we do have issues very much so still present today with the patriarchy. Working in a leadership position within higher education, I'm very much one of the few women at the table, as you mentioned this table, right? So it's still a struggle for us in the United States to create these diverse environments that elevate women, that break the glass ceiling, but also to include them. I think if we are wanting to be better societies that have diverse voices, right, and the research does show us that when we are more welcoming to diversity of thoughts, ideas, backgrounds, we will be more successful. Literally, organizations that have diversified have shown this. It's in the data. When we are willing to start elevating women, right, with the strength that they bring, then I do believe that we will continue pushing the needle forward as a more successful nation. Again, I'm speaking from the standard of the United States. Now, I do believe that that can certainly be the case in other nations. So absolutely, the patriarchy is very much alive. It's something that I have to navigate and push against daily as a woman in leadership, but I think we have to work together to push that and dismantle it.
Now, a lot of your work is focused on how to put kindness in action, Dr. Watts. And I believe since we are on the subject of patriarchy, we often portray the women to be the victim of this system. Whereas if you look at it, the men are the true victims of the system of patriarchy, because you take away, you literally strip them of their compassion, their kindness, and you put them in a box where they are supposed to be the providers, the protectors, and are seen in a rather discompassionate light. How do you think it's affecting the men?
Now, that's an interesting question. So I like to always be very careful when there are generalizations, because there is no group that is a monolith, right? So there is no group of men that will believe the same way. But I do believe when it comes to oppressive systems, those that are in positions of power do suffer to a certain degree. And what does that mean? It means that there is an oppressive system that they are working with and continue to uphold, whether any group wants to be a part of that or not. There is a benefit, an unearned benefit. That's what privilege is. So I think, what was the second part of your question? I'm sorry, I forgot that part.
How do we actually allow men to be more compassionate and not be boxed into those stereotypical roles that patriarchy has served them?
Right. So I do a lot of work in allyship, and what I believe, I think it's very transferable to the question that you're speaking to here, is it will take men, right, in this very specific gendered conversation to come alongside and start dismantling some of that patriarchy. We need people that have positions of power, whether it's race, whether it's religion, in this case, gender, those that are in the dominance, the majority, to really ally together with the marginalized identities to start dismantling. You can have a lot of women here that want to stand up and do stand up and say this is not right, but the point of allyship is that those in positions of power use their voices to amplify change. So I will ask all of the men who see themselves as aligning themselves with human justice, gender justice for women, to use their voices to amplify change.
Absolutely, and I think it's one of those troubled crossroads where change is coming really fast thanks to the technology, and the world is a melting pot, but at the same time, everyone seems to be grappling what could be the code of life, what could be my philosophy of life. Krisha, a lot of communities in the present day, when faced with the challenges of inflation, poverty, different other social subjects, they have been sort of going back to their religious ideologies. And we do see in a large part of the world a rising religiosity tendency. How do you think, is that going to make us more inclusive? Is that going to make us more xenophobic? How are you making sense of it?
I don't know. I mean, partly it will also have to do with economics and with other questions. But I think it's very much what we touched upon in the beginning. I think it has to do with the postmodern world. So, you know, we used to have a very simple life, and many people maybe still have, of course. But for example, in Germany, you grew up in a village, and basically you spent more or less your entire life in that village. You married someone from next door, so your identity was pretty clear, right? I'm Max Müller from village X Epsilon. But now life became, in a certain way, very complicated. You know, how many different jobs, maybe in a total different field. I mean, I'm speaking for an elite, but nevertheless, it trickles down. You move much more, your mobility has changed. You can live in different places, you can marry, you can maybe, you know, I speak also from a Western perspective. You get divorced, you get you get another girlfriend, you know. It's so much and so many different identities that you create at the same time that is overwhelming to an extent that it might cause you also problems with yourself. You ask yourself, who am I? What is my core? And people that we saw, for example, with terrorist attacks we had in Germany, they had a background often of migration. Why? Because they had somehow a loose German identity, but maybe they also had a Turkish identity or another identity, and nobody really told them, you know, to accept also the plurality within themselves. And when you are not sure about yourselves, what do? You look for a stronghold of identity. Because it's very easy. If you have one pillar, it tells you, it gives you all the answers. But be sure, if you have very simple answers to very complicated questions in life, they will be the wrong ones. But they will tell you, this is right, this is wrong, this is right, this is wrong. And it's a very easy answer to a very complex question of modernity.
Very true. And you know, just about a few years ago, we were all trying to make sense of why the West, especially Europe, seems to be struggling with Islamophobia. Of course, there's that perspective, the narrative, what we see in the news. Where are we in terms of that right now?
I think we're at a stage where it's quite stalemate, because we had, you know, the rise with the great flux of migration 2015, and then initially, especially in Germany, we were very welcoming, but that we also realized that we have our own limits also in our minds. And then things changed, and we have all over Europe right-wing parties, and in some countries stronger, in some countries weaker. And I guess they, for example, in Germany, in most parts, in most states, about 10 to 12%, which represents actually, also including Islamophobia, the percentage, at least in Germany, you know, with their attitude, I guess. Maybe the numbers are not exact, but let's say around that. And it will stay like that for the next couple of years, I guess. You know, I don't think there will be an uprising and, you know, there's the majority of German people will be Islamophobic. But we were surprised that there are actually more people than we thought, because right-wing thoughts were simmering under the covers, and when the people finally had the opportunity to utter their opinions, they started doing it, because you had to, you know, you had the same, what Rassheedah said before, in a negative way. Some people came up with their opinion and they said, you know, things in a negative way, and other people saw themselves encouraged to do the same thing. So we're standing at a point where there are certain people, I don't think it will rise, at least speaking for Germany, but I don't see it also receding in the next years to 1 or 2% of the
Krisha,
population.
While we are on the subject, how are you viewing the European identity? I mean, for the last 2 decades, the bloc emerged as a fantastic example for the world, where you can have integrated economic goals, integrated political views about the world, and still have your own individual identity, national identity. So it was seen to be this great, inclusive and diverse bloc of people. Where are we right now?
No, I think this is a misconception. Europe was pretending to be so plural, but it was only plural when it came to some economic questions and some other things. When it came about the core of plurality, Europe was not as plural, at least as it should be nowadays. Karl Jaspers, one of my favorite philosophers, said, and I think this counts also, for example, for Pakistan and other countries, the strength of Europe was its diversity, as Rassheedah said as well, for a company as well. That diversity is the strength of Europe, but what we didn't do, we didn't create also, for example, the narrative. Like we heard as well, narratives are so important. When I meet you and you ask me at the festival where you're from or whom you're representing, I say Germany. The Italian comes, says he's Italian. When do we say, like the Americans, I'm European? I never do it, because we don't think in these patterns, because we also don't create a story around it, you know. We had, for example, a couple of years ago, there was a discussion of to give free railway tickets to students. That would have been a way, coming back to the contact hypothesis, that people get in touch with other people, you know, create their own narratives, get to know the other Europeans, to create a real fundament for plurality. We never did it. It was too expensive. So here we are, you know. It was about economics and some things, but what really mattered to create a real foundation, we never did it. And now, you know, we're in this situation that we are.
How do we lay that foundation is an important question. Dr. Watts, if I may bring you to that. And again, you talk about the pillars, the ACC approach, and moving people into the action through kindness. Is that the answer?
Yes, well, I do want to say, you mentioned the train, and I will answer that too. It's interesting how there are parallels when it comes to issues really around the world, because for us, within the United States context, when it comes to communities where there are certain ethnic groups, and there might be conversations to developing a train system in order to help the economic mobility of people, those ideas tend to be shut down as well, so that communities from certain ethnic groups cannot travel to the majority. So it is a very interesting parallel. But to answer your question, I developed a system out of years of frustration. I embedded my research within this. When people would ask me, I don't know what to do. What is the solution? So along with my book, what I did, I developed a 3-pillar system called the ACA pillars. It sounds very simple, but it's not, right? If any of this were simple, we would be at a solution. So the ACA pillars stands for awareness, courage, and action. What I found is that individuals, leadership, societies, you have to go through this process, which you so very, it was just perfect timing. You mentioned the connection in the beginning, that awareness building. We have to understand what marginalized identities are going through. But then along with that, we have to understand what our legacy is, what type of legacy, and that's my question for you all, and the question that I encourage you to ask your organizational leaders. What legacy do you want to leave behind? Do you want to be a change maker? Do you want to be someone that continues to uphold the status quo and oppression? Or do you want to be a true leader who is dismantling that and elevating justice, because the last pillar is action? I found that once you have that courage and you have that moral compass, you understand what it is inside of you that is going to push you forward, then come what may, you will be willing to take the action. So from our context, if we have a leader, for example, that has been known to marginalize others, they use their power to oppress others, within our context in the United States of America, courageous leadership would look like possibly removing that leader or giving them some additional professional development so that they don't approach others in that way. So it can look differently, but the point is, if you are not willing to move forward courageously, then you're not going to take that approach with action. Because here's the thing, you can be the kindest person in the world. You can see oppression and marginalization, something horrific happens and you say, oh, that's so horrible, I can't believe it. But if you're not doing anything to take an action step to stop that, then you are part of the system.
Right. And what about undoing the damage or some course correction? I mean, part of it is not just, being equipped, but what if you're supposed to effect a change by perhaps coming out clean and saying, yes, a certain community, a certain, portion of people or a community has been wronged, and now we'd like to correct it. Do you think every leader would have that space to maneuver and do that?
Ooh, now I don't know if every leader would have that space, but I encourage you to create that space.
Yeah.
If you are in a leadership position, take that leadership position strongly and appropriately. I will tell you again from the United States context, what we've done to the attempts that we've had to course correct is equity. So for us, for example, within higher education, when it comes to recruiting students, we are very focused on recruiting students from certain ethnic groups to sort of create a balance within the system, because we see that a lot of ethnic minority groups have been marginalized. They have not had the same access for opportunity. So along with that, from a government perspective, our government has also created scholarship programs that create more access, that provide funding for these students to enroll within college. Again, a very equity-minded approach. However, I must say, we also have leaders within the United States, and I don't want to get too political, but we do have leaderships, depending on the state in our country, that are trying to create laws to stop these movements forward, because within their value and in their belief system, if you create this equity, they believe that the majority is being harmed. So I share that because there's always going to be a push and pull, a tension when you are doing this work as leaders and just as everyone. But I strongly believe that all of us are leaders in our approach. Absolutely. And again, think about what legacy do you want to leave behind when you do this work?
I think that's very interesting because we've touched upon the subject of generational trauma, community healing, as you would recommend people to go for. How different is this present day global young generation? Krisha, a lot has been said about Gen Z. Do you think a lot of inclusion and diversity related subjects come to them naturally? They are coming into, there seems to be this mass awakening where people are anyways discarding these biases and are questioning them. Do you believe that they will usher in a new era and perhaps will just need to be supported a little bit?
I mean, I would as well repeat what Rassheedah said. It's difficult to generalize. And I also know these people you're talking about because they're in my bubble. And I would agree for them, it's, you know, we even, you know, if there's he, she, we have all fluent genders in between. But that's a bubble as well. We still have also in this generation, we have many people that I talked about because of the difficulties of modern life who fall back into the traps of really generalizing, of essentializing people to a degree that is unhealthy for the world. So to simplify it, just yes and no. There is this generation, it's parts of it, but it's definitely not the entire generation.
You're right, absolutely, that there can't be generalizations, but there has to be a well-thought plan in action. And again, I think one of the best questions in today's conversation is what Dr. Watts has been asking every individual in every organization, that what is going to be your legacy? What is it that you're helping to create and build? And are you going to be courageous enough to dismantle what has been created in the past and perhaps is not serving us anymore? Thank you very much, guys, for... Would you want to add something?
Can I say one last thing?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't want to make this personal, but I found it so interesting that we talked a lot about relations and contacts. And, you know, it just came to my mind when I was sitting here. It was the first time I tried to come to Pakistan last summer. I didn't have an invitation just because it was interesting. And I have a father at home in India who's very right-wing, and we have a lot of, we don't have dialogues, we have a lot of fierce discussions. And you know, there are many people obviously on the Indian side who would say, why do you go to Pakistan? And I said, I want to go to Pakistan exactly because of that reason. I want to get in touch with the people. And so far the experience has been great. And that's what I would just, whether it's leadership, whether it's politics, I think that's one of the main things. I mean, I simplify it. Obviously it won't, you know, will create world peace, but it's a start. You know, to try to get in touch with other people, whether it may be to literature or other ways. I know.
I think you're spot on. I have a little bit of a dated data about this. Many years ago, they conducted a survey about how and which region is the most connected one. And while just as there was ease of travel and ease of communication in Europe and Americas, South Asia, even when it's the most populous region and they've had shared history for many centuries, it's perhaps the most difficult to be mobile around. And you're right, once you actually make contact, a lot of biases are going to melt away. So thank you very much for sticking that nugget in over here. Guys, we're going to open the floor for questions. We have about 10 minutes and we can take some questions, please. We have the last 15 minutes? 15 minutes, okay. So we have a gentleman here. Can we please direct a mic to him? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Rassheedah.
This mic isn't working.
My name is Rassheedah and I'm a graduate. Both of you can give me the answer. Sir, we have a lot of speakings and narrations, but how can we convert these narration into practical implementation in society?
How can we practically implement and make sure that we are diverse and inclusive in our approach? I mean, all these are theories. He'd like to see them into action. Your take on the subject. Dr. Watts, do you want to go first?
Sure, absolutely. So you can put policies in place, right? And again, I'm speaking very much from the lens of the United States of America. So you can take as much as is applicable here, but understand the tenets behind it. So we do have policies in place when we start talking about we call protected classes. So when it comes to gender, when it comes to folks who have disabilities, and the list goes on from there, folks of ethnic groups, those policies are there to help ensure that we have a more diverse environment. So that is certainly a structural, a systematic way that you can ensure that marginalized identities are represented within an organization. Within that as well, we do have, let's say once an organization is moving the needle forward with bringing diverse representation to start building inclusive communities, we do have different, we might call them ERGs, employee resource groups, we might call them affinity clubs. But what they are is they are these groups of folks with similar identities, similar passions that can come together and feel confidence that they can share their stories and not be judged. What we found, what the data shows us, is that those organizations that implement these resource groups or these clubs, people feel more a part of their environment because they know that they can turn around to someone that's like them and they will find a connection there, compared to those organizations where they just show up and they might feel that no one cares because no one's talking to them. So those are two different approaches. Certainly the policy, the structural piece, but then also the inclusive piece, creating environments where people come together to share commonalities.
And the interesting part is, like, once you implement a policy, whether you do it to, you know, a percentage or whatever you do, once you're, whatever it may be, I work in an NGO, I'm a director of an NGO, so I have, you know, similar issues sometimes as well. It diversifies itself. So you have to implement it in the beginning and diversify different fields in the company, for example. And once you do it, usually it eases up the situation. And it's also important not just, you know, to have representatives, 2 or 3 people, but they also have to be in crucial positions. You know, when you have an HR team, for example, if you know, they're hiring people, but they're still just, you know, certain kind of people, then you don't have a diversity there, and they won't less likely look for other diverse people, you know. And the same is for the budget. Who controls the budget? Where does the money go, you know? Diversity should not only then stick to one part, but diversify itself in the structure.
So asking the right questions and maybe asking organizations to have policies and standards put in place could be a way of moving
And
forward.
if I may add one more, maybe 2 more, because you brought a few things up for me. Consider having, at least within the United States, some organizations have what we call a diversity advocate. So someone who is researched, certainly passionate about this, passionate about advocating for marginalized groups, and that individual either serves in the organization, or let's say it's an academic institution, or they might serve in committees. So for example, when you talk about human resources, right, the search committee, we operate through search committees. So that person has what we call an equity lens. They are gauging to see who are the people that are being interviewed for the position. Do we have a diverse pool of people? Because that can help ensure that you have more diversity. Many times, as you mentioned, when you don't have that equity lens within a formal role, then what tends to happen is that the majority group will hire people that are part of the majority. It's human nature.
So I think that answers that very comprehensively. Sir, do you have a question? Yes. Can we please pass a mic to the gentleman, please? Okay. आपके पास मैं इसके बाद आती हूँ, पहले इनका सवाल ले लें। जी।
Hello. As you said, if we exclude person to this society, it's lead to loss empathy. How do you see in today digital world, as we go digital, how do you see in?
So your question is that in a digital world where there is distance and less contact, people are losing empathy.
Yes, yes.
Okay. And how do we bring in empathy in the center stage when there's less and less contact? Just as you mentioned, you could spend an entire week in Germany without having to speak to a person.
You want to start, or should I?
Sure, I mean, I can if you'd like me to.
Then please.
So It's interesting this time that we've fallen in during COVID, right? Because the way that impacted us in the United States, certainly I'm sure in different places, is it meant everyone, more or less, so let me not speak in broad terms, it meant a majority of people started working online. So those interactions, even from a student perspective and faculty members, that didn't exist anymore because people were not coming. There was an opportunity for in-person relationship. So I'm not going to say this as the solution, but I'm going to share this with you as a solution that we used effectively. We were able to meet online. So first it took commitment for people to want to still connect virtually. But once we had that commitment to commit virtually, we were able to commit and still develop those relationships. So as an example, I had a few different sessions. We had a community session that would take place maybe every Friday, and that provided an opportunity for everyone in our organization to still meet, to still get to know each other. So that is one way, at least from a virtual perspective, using technology that we were able to connect.
Right. Krisha, your take on it?
I think it's important to mention, because I was vilifying the internet, it also has, it's not black and white either. So we have the positive aspect, for example, that people who were prior to the internet, they weren't able to get in touch with other people, even digitally. People with certain, physical disabilities. And suddenly, because of the internet and maybe also some certain matching apps, they were able to find people they couldn't get in touch with before. So it's not entirely negative, right? But in general, what we saw as well is that we're human beings made, in a physical world, made up from a body, and that human contact is important because it's not the same, even if it comes, for example, to trust or responsibility. The feeling of responsibility towards you, Rassheedah, because you're sitting here as a physical being, is much, much stronger than the responsibility that I have, that I at least feel immediately towards the people in Turkey and what they're suffering from. That's just very human, And there is a difference that we have to realize and that we have to take into consideration, right? We have to work with the internet, but the internet will not be the solution for everything. It will also cause certain problems if we only focus on it. If we go with the dream of some Silicon Valley people and think we can upload our brain and live forever, I think is a total misconception of human individuality and humanity. So, we have to find a balance of both and, not going in either direction.
Can I add to that? I mean, I have often seen some of the most disconnected, distant people who live in the same home. So it's less about distance and FaceTime that you have with people, it's more about the effort and the kindness and the empathy that you hold. And I would like to share my own experience. The last 5 months, I was in a leadership course that was titled as Hardcore Leadership. And we had 83 people from all around the globe, but just because we were in this container and we were committed to building trust and empathy and working together, I mean, I think I have created and I have formed lifelong friendships with people. So technology can actually come to your rescue as well. I mean, before COVID, before the whole model of this program came over on Zoom, it used to be an in-person event only happening in the US, and I would not have been able to take off 5 months and be a part of it. Just because we were able to do it online, we actually curated many strong relationships there. So it's really about your own perspective and how much effort you would like to put into that. That's my take.
I'd also like to share something maybe a little bit more practical if the virtual piece is not something practical towards what you're asking. At North Hennepin Community College, we have something called the immersion experience, and it can look different in different organizations. But basically what that is, it's an opportunity for folks who sign up for this course to travel to different neighborhoods, to different places where perhaps that exchange is not happening natural because people aren't able to travel. But this provides opportunity to learn about the culture and the history of others. They learn by being in the presence of others. So that's where that in-person piece comes. So when you talk about these locations that are very distant, consider if there is a role that your organization or wherever you guys are can create some sort of traveling environment where folks who are interested can visit and have these in-person connections.
Absolutely. And I've just been cautioned we have the last 5 minutes, so we'll take the last question.
Madam, I want to know that the doctrine of diversity and inclusiveness is spreading all over the world, and it is open debating. We have been debating a lot on the organizations. We have been debating a lot on about diversity, inclusion in leadership also, and human behavior also, and the family issues also, and in other relationships. Do you think there's a lot of hatred society is going to develop on the base of multi-ethnicity or on the religions, on the human rights violations internationally and all over the world? Do you think to make a positive, healthy, creative society, we have to spread the message of diversity, the doctrine of diversity when talk about leadership can we use social media as a channel to overcome the hatred society and develop a positive, creative society in all over the world?
Thank you. I think we need to use every tool that we have at our disposal to preach the message of the beautiful diversity that we have and to preach the message of inclusion. So certainly social media is an approach that we can take. It goes back to that first pillar, awareness building, right? Which you mentioned as connection. So we have to use all of those different tools. Whether it's the traveling in person, whether it's the taking the trains if we have that available, or meeting virtually, absolutely. I think once we start working together and continuing to elevate these conversations of diversity and inclusion, then the masses will see that this is an important value. It's certainly important for us in the United States of America, which is why we continue to talk about diversity and inclusion. So if that is a struggle, a tension, as it very much is in the United States, I just encourage us all to not give up. Let's continue pushing forward as the courageous leaders that I know we all can be.
I think that's a fantastic...
Mainly, when you talk about diversity, mainly it's focused on the gender diversity. And there diversity has so many other dimensions as well.
We try to focus on all of them. It's just not about gender. It's about geographic, ethnic, religious. All kinds of people should be able to have equal opportunities and an opportunity to move forward in life. Right? Is there a question regarding the gender? You have a question. Can we take one? Okay, last question then. Okay, so her question
How can we advocate for diversity and inclusion with people who don't understand its importance, especially at the workplace?
You know, the thing is, if I'm brutally honest, the thing about social change, there are different perspectives. And some studies show that, and that's why we're talking about leadership, there's often a trickle-down effect, even in the change of society. It's not, it's a very beautiful utopic picture that you think that the entire society has the idea of the better and then they change altogether. No, mostly it's like an elite, maybe leaders, intellectuals, artists, who have a certain idea which then manifests itself somewhere in society and trickles down, you know? And I guess sometimes, I'm not speaking for every situation, but often there have to be courageous leaders who step forward, other people, and then slowly, with time, and not everyone, you know, there's some things that won't change in the generation also in Germany. My grandmother, she still, to a certain degree, has certain opinions that I don't agree, and she will never change it. It's just so innate, you know, and you can't, you know, live with the illusion that you will, wait, I mean, that's also not the project, but not everyone will be converted, right? But if someone, you know, then there might be a trickle-down effect upon other people.
And I think it really will have to be the drivers who are moving forward. Just a lot of these subjects may also not be too relevant to your grandparents' generation. So I guess it's more about who will be facing the the scenario and the music and perhaps be advocating it.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important that we're speaking about leaders, because they have probably less at stake than when I'm working somewhere there in the lowest stratum of the company. As you mentioned before, the possibility of me getting sacked is much higher. If I'm in a higher position, I also have more power to make change. So the responsibility usually is, as so many Buddha and all those people said, you know, with more power comes more responsibility, and also when it comes to change.
Thank you so much for that, Krisha. Thank you so much, Dr. Voss. Ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful panel talking about courageous leadership, diversity and inclusion. It truly was a pleasure to have you both here.
Thank you.
Thank you.